Of all the books that I have read on ADHD and all the resources I've read on parenting in an effort to become a better parent to both my son and my more neurotypical children, the one book that stands out to me and the book that really rises above the others in terms of how it has adjusted my parenting and adjusted my thinking about their behavior is Hi everybody, welcome back to Project Happy Home. For those of you who are new here, I'm Tanya, a doctor, lawyer turned homeschool mom of 3 kids ages 9, 6, and 4. If you're interested in videos about secular homeschooling, raising a child with ADHD, and living a more essentialist lifestyle, you have come to the right place, so be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. For the past year or so, my friend Danielle over at TakeCareMama and I have been doing videos related to parenting an emotionally complex child, including everything from SPD to ADHD to autism, etc. This year, we've actually decided to hone in a little bit more on ADHD, and often we do collaborative videos on one particular aspect of ADHD that might be giving you a little bit of difficulty in your home. Our last video together was on meltdowns, and it was very, very informative for me to watch Danielle's video, especially because she has this mnemonic that she's devised on her own to give parents just sort of a structured approach to how we should handle ourselves during a meltdown. So if you haven't seen Danielle's videos on meltdowns or mine, be sure to check them out. I will leave them linked down in the description box down below. In today's video, we're going to talk about some of the triggers for those meltdowns and how you can best address them or how we can approach these triggers. Now, when people talk about triggers for ADHD, and if you Google triggers for ADHD, often you'll find very varied responses as to what they can be. And that is because the adage is true that if you've met one child with ADHD, you've met exactly one child with ADHD, which I think is true of a lot of personality and learning disorders. You know, the personality of the child and their fundamental uniqueness informs the diagnosis as well, right? So my son with ADHD is going to be different than your son with ADHD or your daughter with ADHD, etc. So keeping that in mind, when I approach this topic of triggers, I think the most important thing to do, again, is to be methodical about observing our child and to try to raise the child we have and not the child we think he or she should be. Because particularly in the realm of meltdowns and triggers, I think sometimes there's a lot of shoulding involved in what we say to them. This shouldn't upset you. You shouldn't be this upset about this. This is a silly matter. This is small. This is that. If we can take a step back from that approach, and I've definitely gone there myself, so no judgment again, but if we can take a step back from that and actually try to observe what actually triggers the meltdowns, what triggers the negative responses or the reactions that we find societally unacceptable, I think we have a better chance of adjusting our child's responses and behaviors. Because we are here to scaffold them as they grow, right? We know with ADHD that they have this delayed brain maturation. So when we're looking at our 9-year-old or our 10-year-old, we should be expecting the emotional maturity, the cognitive maturity that way of like a 6-year-old, right? At least. If we can look at them with compassion in those moments of difficulty and say, instead of my kid is giving me a hard time, my kid is having a real hard time here. Let me observe what set this off so that I can make it better next time. We have a better chance of making our house a happier place. So the way I actually started to observe and notice and record my son's triggers was very simply on my iPhone. So I would just pick up my iPhone, which I generally had with me, and just note it. Like, this is the date, this is the day of the week, this is the time, and this is what I think just happened. And I would kind of catalog my own response too, if I had sort of gotten worked up in response or if I had not. And that was just a helpful log for me to keep. Now, I didn't really keep it for more than a couple months, but while I did, it was very helpful because sometimes at night I would go over and see like what had happened during that day where he had dysregulated. Keeping a log was incredibly helpful, not only because it was helpful to look back on those events and see what those triggers were, but it also forced me into a more higher brain state where instead of reacting explosively myself or getting very worked up myself, I was in a more studious, kind of detached frame of mind where I was like, oh, I have to remember to write this down. And I would take my phone, I would calm the situation to the best of my ability, but I would take my phone and try to record what had happened. Reviewing that in the evenings to come was very helpful because you really do see a pattern emerging. It is one thing to complain to your spouse when they come home or your friends, my child is always getting upset about X, Y, and Z, and this happened again today, and da-da-da-da-da. But in our heat of just sort of expressing our own anxiety and angst about this, we're not really looking at it scientifically. We're not really looking at it with a calm, detached view, or even a helpful eye. We are simply unloading. Taking actual notes or just jotting down what you think those triggers were when they melted down really allows you to, one, detach in the moment, but also, two, to formulate a plan of how you can best avoid these triggers for your child in the future. So I, for example, would notice certain times of day where this was becoming more of a problem. And then that would make me reflect, is it because of his level of tiredness? Is it because of hunger? Is it because of, what is it? These were clues. This data that I was jotting down were clues for how I could best shape this environment that my child is growing up in. Because to be a child with ADHD means you are almost always a little bit more stressed than your peers. You know that you are reacting differently and with different levels of intensity than the average kid your age. You know that certain things are going to assault your senses. You just don't know what they are and why this is happening. And that's part of the reason why I find it so important to discuss these things with our children, to inform them about how brain development happens, to let them know this is not their fault, to let them know they're not broken or faulty in any way, that this is just how their brain is developing at this pace. And when they have these inappropriate reactions, it might be because their brain is just freaking out in a way that a neurotypical brain of that age would not, but that they will get there, it will be okay. And that identifying the triggers, the reason mommy's taking this note is because I want to see how I can help. I want to see how we can make this better for you, Be on their team always. That's something else I do. I remember once I was taking a note and my son was like, you're writing it down again. And I had to sit with him and explain, it made me realize that this might look like I'm jotting down something bad about him, but really I explained to him, how mommy has triggers, all the shoes being everywhere in the garage. That was a trigger I needed to learn about myself, so that I could better learn how to adjust my behavior to be more appropriate when I got mad about that. And I was like, I'm trying to figure out what your triggers are so that we could adjust things to make your life better, to make our life together as a family better. And just reminding them that you are on their team is so helpful. So with triggers, I think the most important thing is not to read internet articles on what are the typical triggers of ADHD or what types of foods should I avoid, because there's been extensive research done on that, and I'll do another video on this, but while there's certain categories of foods that have been identified, there is not conclusive evidence that following one set diet or another will actually alleviate the symptoms of ADHD. That being said, you guys should do what you think is right in order to test things. Testing the waters is really important, I think. Getting back to the topic of triggers, though, observe your child with a compassionate eye. Take notes. It will do two awesome things at once. It will detach you from the moment. It will allow you to engage your higher brain, which will calm down your reaction to this meltdown or this anger or whatever is happening in front of you. And it'll give you a piece of data on your kid that you are recording without anger, without censure and disapproval. You are just trying to figure this out. Be a scientist of your kid. I think it is so important. And to that end, I have one resource I would recommend to you. Of all the books that I have read on ADHD and all the resources I've read on parenting in an effort to become a better parent to both my son and my more neurotypical children, the one book that stands out to me and the book that really rises above the others in terms of how it has adjusted my parenting and adjusted my thinking about their behavior is The Whole Brainchild by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. If you have not read this book, I cannot recommend it highly enough. I've reread it about 4 or 5 times at this point, And it goes through, it's not an easy read. It is not by any means enjoyable. I am not here to plug this book as like great summer reading, but it was on my summer reading list if you watch that video, because it is so true and helpful and matter of fact about how our human brains develop, how our prefrontal cortex is our higher brain, our higher level thinking, the reasonable, rational part of our brain, and how our amygdala like controls our fear, flight response. And sometimes when our body is hijacked by our amygdala, no amount of talking in that moment is going to help, which is why it really does teach you, like, give your child a second, give your child some time to feel all those feelings and let that release. Teach them tools to help their prefrontal cortex grab hold of their amygdala again. In the book, they have this little model that they call the hand model, where it's like, this is your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala is your thumb being held in there. And sometimes when you lose control, you flip your lid and your prefrontal cortex stops talking to your amygdala. And your amygdala is just freaking out and saying to the rest of your body, this is an emergency. My sibling knocked over my Lego tower and now it's an emergency, like Mayday, Mayday. And you have flipped your lid and your prefrontal cortex is not talking to your amygdala. Explaining this to kids really gives them an idea that, okay, I'm not broken. My brain is having an issue right now. Like, I need to figure out a way to tell my prefrontal cortex, I call it the mommy brain to grab that baby brain again. You know, I need to tell them something to get my higher order thinking back online. And that little model, that hand model, helps my kids so much to understand it. And sometimes if I have a freak out, or if one of his siblings has a freak out, I say, like, the baby brain's going nuts. We got to get that mommy brain to grab that baby brain again. You know, we've got to get that higher order thinking back. And it really allows kids not to feel like something's wrong with them, like they're horrible kids. You know, this is just natural responses. This is your body trying to do its best. And that's what I tell them. And what we practice to gain control of ourselves in those moments, like meditation, like deep breathing, like clenching our muscles and relaxing our muscles, all these little tricks, you know, punching a pillow, stomping your feet, all of that is your body trying to get your higher order thinking back online. So if we can teach our kids, there's nothing wrong with them, there's nothing broken. Let's figure out what your triggers are. Let's do it together. I'm going to take notes. You can take notes too. We can talk about it at the end of the day. Like, what happened there? What happened? Like, what was that trigger? Was it that somebody was in your room without having permission? Was it that I hurried you when you didn't want to be hurried? Was it that I shouted for you from downstairs and you felt like I was mad at you? What was that trigger? Was it that you were just hungry? It was too long since you ate last time? Let's take notes and figure it out. Be on a team with your kid. Investigate what's going on. Be curious about this. Don't just be dismayed. And that's really my biggest advice about triggers. Read the whole Brainchild, understand how neural development works, and just be on a team with your child. All of this is a moving target. They are growing. Their brain is developing. But if they can understand that human beings are designed to panic. Human beings are designed to have meltdowns at triggers and exaggerated reactions. And it's up to us to figure out a way to minimize that in their environment, but also to teach them how best to deal with it when triggers occur. You know, both things are true. We as parents have immense power in shaping their environment. If we can decrease triggers, we should. If I can tell his sisters, you know, don't enter his room without knocking. It really does bother him. I can do that for him. You know, I can make that like a household value for him. Other kids might not be bothered by this so much, but if he is, I can do him this favor. And so just tell them, we are in it together. We will figure out what happened today during that meltdown. We will figure out what your triggers are, and I'm going to do my best to minimize those like uncomfortable circumstances, those things that like, you know, set you off. But we're also going to work together to figure out how you can best calm yourself when they happen. How can you re-engage your higher level brain? Those are our two goals with triggers. I am not interested in making my child like every other child his age. I am not interested in making him into a perfect like robot of a perfect kid. I do want to give him tools so that he can best manage himself as he grows. And honestly, like, I try to teach all my kids this stuff because even neurotypical kids have triggers and even neurotypical kids can melt down. And sometimes you just need to let your kid know that you're on their side, you know? I relate that same language, meltdowns, triggers, solutions, meditation, all of that to my own behavior too. Because if nothing else, my kids see how I actually behave and they understand that that doesn't make me a bad person. When I mess up, that doesn't make me a bad person. My biggest goal with all my children, my son who has ADHD and my more neurotypical daughters, is that they don't feel like there's anything wrong with them. That they know they are just small mammals in this world figuring out how to do their best and to interact peacefully with each other to the best of their ability most of the time. So I hope that was helpful to you guys. Don't forget to check out my friend Danielle's video at TakeCareMama. She is awesome. She has great videos on ADHD and many other things, so be sure to check out her channel. I will link it down below. As always, I so appreciate your time. Thank you for spending some of it with me, and I wish you the very best day.